Welcome to the Focus Fundraiser. This is where I get to discuss how to focus on the right fundraising practices with fundraisers and coaches and consultants who are in the trenches. Because something that we believe is doing more shouldn't be your goal in life and in fundraising. Focusing on what matters most is what moves the needle. Today's guest, she draws on years of nonprofit leadership and now empowers others to embrace visibility and leadership presence. And she is also a speaker at the Well Told Nonprofit Conference here in April. So if you care about showing up powerfully in rooms that matter, lean into what Dayna Del Val has to say today. Dayna, welcome to the show.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having me on.
All right, let's dive in. Start us off by sharing a bit about yourself and your path into the nonprofit sector. And then I want to touch on Well Told event after that.
Sure. So I kind of came to the nonprofit sector the way many people do, almost accidentally. I'm a lifetime actor and writer and performer, and really was in Fargo a little bit against my, not against my will, but against my desire. We'll leave it at that. I really had hoped to be a movie star and intended to live in Los Angeles after getting my theater degree, and a series of events happened. And so I ended up back in Fargo. And really my agenda, aside from trying to be a good mom, was to keep a very flexible schedule so that if Steven Spielberg ever landed in Fargo and saw me, I could be whisked off to Hollywood at any moment. And then in my middle 30s, Linda Boyd, who was the then executive director of the Fargo Moorhead Symphony, took me out for lunch and said, "There's a job at the Arts Partnership I think you should apply for." And I said to her, "Yeah, what is that?" And she explained what the Arts Partnership was. And I went to look at the job description. And I will be really honest with you, I applied because it said it could be part-time. And again, that allowed me to keep my Steven Spielberg window open. So I applied and I got the job as executive director, which eventually turned into president and CEO. And, like many of us who end up in nonprofit leadership, what I didn't know would have filled an ocean, and what I did know would have filled a thimble. But my instincts were pretty good, and I can comfortably talk in front of people, and I was curious and ready to learn. So I ran that organization for almost 13 years, stepped away just about 3 years ago. And, it was an incredible job for me. In some ways, it was kind of my greatest acting job because I really got to shape that role. And it was such an exciting time in Fargo. It felt like there was such great momentum, and it was fun to be part of that. So that's the shortish answer to where I am and how I got where I got.
Well, like many fundraisers who are on, it sounds like you stumbled backwards into fundraising and it wasn't something that you were pursuing. And that's a normal path for most. I want to dive into the leadership side of things, but first, you were speaking at Well Told this April. Tell me a little bit your take on the conference. You were the host for all of the virtual attendees last year, so you've been a part of it already. What are you excited about to challenge the leaders in the room with while you speak? And why do you think fundraisers should take the time to attend this event in the first place?
So I went last year. I'm not fundraising any longer, but I went really to support Max and Tellwell and DonorDoc, and because the nonprofit sector really still has a big piece of my heart. It really was the role of my adult life. And so I feel very strongly that that sector needs so much nurturing, needs so much community building, needs so many places to show up and be well taken care of. And this conference does that better than probably any conference I have ever been to. I was stunned at the way it was thoughtfully put together, the speakers, the experience, all of it. So I expect the same will be true this year. But really what I'm coming to talk about is exactly what I do now in my professional work, which is, what does it mean to be audaciously visible? We don't do a good job of training people how to show up in front of people, whether that's a crowd of 5,000 at a TED Talk or a one-on-one conversation with a donor and everybody in between. Why would you know how to be an excellent presenter if it's not something that you've spent time with? And like so many facets of the arts, I think people think, well, you either can stand up and speak or you can't. And most people don't want to do it. They're panic stricken about it. But what's true is that so much of it is teachable, which means it's also learnable. And I'm really coming just to give people some foundational things to think about before they ever step on a stage or in front of an important board meeting, donor, legislator, whoever it is you're talking about, so that you can bring your strongest self and strongest ability to engage them to the conversation.
I'm super pumped to hear this. I feel like I can learn lessons on this speech as well, even though it's catered towards fundraisers. So excited for this. I want to touch on, we're going to touch on some of the topic that you're going to speak more in depth at, well told on in this. But before that, so jumping back into the leadership conversation. So you led regional arts for nonprofit, the regional arts nonprofit for over a decade.
Hmm.
Were there leadership lessons from that role that shaped how you are now coaching leaders, especially in those high stakes conversations with donors and boards and all that?
It's a great question, Rob. Um, of course. I mean, I really learned everything and anything I know about leadership in that role because previous to that, the only leadership roles I'd ever had were parenting, and I'd also been a professor for about a dozen years at the local colleges, very part time. So, really, all I knew when I stepped into that role was okay, I don't want to parent staff or the people I'm spending time with. And I don't think it's about teaching either. What is it about? So I started to look around at other leaders who I thought appeared to be doing things well, appeared to have skill sets that I didn't have. And then I think really what was key for me was when I realized how valuable my acting background was to this work. Because really, at the end of the day, acting is about listening and responding honestly. Well, that's really all conversation is. And the reason that it often doesn't go very well is because we're not listening. We're preparing what we're going to say next. And so somebody might be telling you something, giving you some kind of conscious or unconscious clue into, if we're talking about donors, into what's really meaningful to them. But you're so busy thinking, okay, am I going to talk about this story or am I going to tell them this statistic or am I going to talk about this profit and loss or am I going to reveal to them the kind of trouble that we're in that you don't even catch the clue that they've given you. And so you've lost your opportunity to really hit that point for them, which might light them up and suddenly take it from a donor and nonprofit relationship to a real partnership, which is, of course, what everybody in the nonprofit sector is actually striving for. What does it look like when someone with financial resources decides that your mission is where they want to put their dollars? That's a partnership. That's no longer a funding relationship. And that's really where the sweet spot comes.
But I couldn't agree more. So when you think about nonprofit professionals, fundraisers specifically in this, where do you see them shrinking or playing small in the moments that require more boldness?
I remember early on, I was sitting in a meeting with the person who made decisions for a major company in town. And there were probably three or four of us from my team and my board and him. And somebody at the table said, can you imagine if this business would give us $5,000 a year? And everybody on my side of the table kind of oohed and awed and thought about it. And the person who was with the corporation said, I'm just going to tell you, you're thinking way too small. $5,000 for us is not a meaningful gift. Doesn't mean we wouldn't give it, but that's not the kind of gift that excites us because it's not significant enough to really create, again, this partnership. So I think showing up small never serves you. Never, 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 never. I must have said this 100 million times in those 13 years I ran that organization. If you can take the no, you can make the ask. So why not ask big? If you ask from a place of curiosity and genuine need, you've expressed what you need, you've listened to what they're interested in, If you make a big ask that they either can't or won't fulfill, that's okay. I had a donor one time say to me very, very early in my time, we were having lunch, and I said to him, "How do you, as someone who gets all these asks, manage that?" Because I realized that one thing I was doing, and I think this is very typical of people who deal with donors, is we tell ourselves stories about them. So we shut the door before we ever even give them the opportunity to open or shut the door. And he said to me, "Well, I know exactly what all these meetings are going to be. I may not know the dollar amount, but I know why you asked me to lunch. And I'm very comfortable listening to your mission, to your report, to your story, whatever you're telling me, and then deciding, yes, I am interested in this, or no, thank you." And as soon as I heard him say that, it helped me remember that I only need to control what's happening on my side of the ask, and I need to stop assuming what a potential or an existing donor is or isn't going to do for me. I need to just make the ask in the best, strongest way I can. And then another really important piece of advice is make the ask and then sit back and be quiet, which is hard.
Yeah. You touched on something I think that's really important there on asking the right questions, which ties back to listening well. Because if you
Mhm.
make a big ask and you show up boldly, but you're just completely missing the mark because you weren't listening and discovering correctly of making that ask that aligns with what they're going after and what they're passionate about and how they want to partner. You might be asking for $50,000 and realistically they are a $5,000 org. And so it's
Right.
also showing up boldly in how you're asking questions. And a saying I always love is be more interested in those around you than in yourself. So ask good questions, listen and learn, and then make the ask.
And I would just add to that, Rob, do your research.
Mm,
Look around at the programs or the websites of other nonprofits. If you see this person or this couple or this business listed in the, $99 to $5,000 donor list in multiple places, then probably they're not the people to ask for $100,000. And conversely, the same thing. Again, not every company or person is going to give you what they're giving other places, but that gives you a little bit of a taste for what their um what's the word I'm looking for? What their capacity is, and then figure out, is it of interest to them? I will never forget getting a phone call years ago from a disabled veterans basketball group trying to raise funds. Okay, I have a lot of heart for people who have fought in our military and become disabled. And I grew up in a major basketball household, multi-generation of coaches. But that's not something I'm passionate about. And so I'm not going to support that organization because by saying yes to something that I'm not actually passionate about is diminishing my ability to support what I am passionate about. And so make the ask and be prepared to accept a no and be okay with it.
For fundraisers who fear criticism, what's the cost of staying hidden and shying away from that no?
The cost is a yes. I mean, that's the plain and simple. You just don't know who will say yes. And so go in with the expectation that everyone will say yes. Let them surprise and, in many instances, disappoint you because the yeses, you just don't know where they're going to come from. And if you never show up and you're never willing to accept a no, you're very unlikely to get a yes.
That's good. All right, I'm going to shift a little bit. There's end of year just happened. Beginning of the year is beginning. They're starting to prep for spring events, getting donor meetings on the schedule. Is there a practical shift that you would share that they can make this month to communicate with more authority and more authenticity?
Yeah, don't apologize. Own who you are, own the organization you run, own the mission, own the work, own the struggles, own the wins. there's nothing to apologize for. This work is really hard. I don't know a nonprofit leader, whether they are the CEO and or the development director or they have development staff. I don't know anybody who doesn't feel like it's hard and getting more challenging as the needs go up and it feels like the dollars are dwindling. Don't apologize for the work that you do and don't apologize for the need. And don't underpay someone to try to show your donors that you're using your money wisely. The wisest investment you can make is in savvy, smart, curious, mission driven staff. And you can't expect people to do this work on fumes. You can't eat goodwill. You can only eat what your check allows you to buy. So invest in your people and don't apologize for it and show up and own what you're doing. Your work really matters. Not every single person you ask to support you will say yes. That doesn't negate the value of your work.
I feel like you're speaking from experience there. Is there a story in there from your time as a fundraiser or as a CEO?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stories. I worked up a system one time with some existing donors in mind. I had just come from some training, and so I was kind of jacked up on what I was going to get. And I came up with a multi-year tiered funding plan. And I sat in front of two existing donors who'd been very supportive of me, both as a leader and of the organization. And I made this ask. And one of them said to me, but if I give you more, aren't you just going to ask for more next year? And I said, yeah, that's how it works. And he said, well, when is enough enough? And I didn't say it, and I'm glad I didn't say it because it wouldn't have been appropriate. But what I thought about later was saying to him, did you accept your salary increase this year? When is enough enough? I mean, that's a silly question. When is enough enough? Enough is enough when we no longer need to support the mission of the organization. You know, a homeless shelter wouldn't need to exist if everybody had a home. Art support wouldn't need to exist if artists could make a living wage. So, that was a really devastating meeting. Neither one of them came forward to support this tiered plan. They weren't obligated to. I went back to the office. I cried harder than I probably ever cried any day in my 13 years. I've never forgotten it. I think about that a lot in my own life, in the life of other people who are raising funds. And it was an okay question for him to ask. I didn't have an answer to it because there isn't really such a thing as enough. And you have to just be okay with that. Not everybody's going to say yes. That really is the biggest lesson I can try to impart on people. Not everyone's going to say yes. That doesn't negate the value of your work, and it doesn't mean you should stop asking.
That's so good. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. All right, Dayna, I always end with what I call the tactical takeaway question, which is something that fundraisers can take away from this, from listening to this and do today. So what is one thing that every fundraiser should do today that you believe matters most?
Commit to owning your message unapologetically, with confidence, and show up and just comfortably own it. And if you don't know how to do that, then work with a coach who can help you do the pre-work, the during work, and the post-work. It's really vital. It's absolutely teachable. It's okay if you don't know it yet, but figure out how to get that help because it will change the way you walk into every single donor meeting you have, which will change the way your budget grows.
That's good. That's hard advice to spend money on yourself and invest in yourself, but that's
It
fantastic
is.
advice.
Yeah, it
All right.
is. And you will never regret it.
For those listening, if this conversation sparked something for you, imagine going deeper with Dayna at Well Told in April. So this is a one-day conference. It's in person and online, so you can attend in person or online, and you don't want to miss Dayna and our all-star lineup of other speakers. We have really fantastic takeaways for you to walk away with. It's not your typical conference where you're just going to walk away inspired. This is a hands-on event that will make you a better leader, a better fundraiser, and a better storyteller. So So I'll add a link in the description and comments for you to sign up for this event. Dayna, thank you so much for giving your advice and your expertise today. You were fantastic.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate the platform to be there, and I will see you in April.
All right. For those listening, we will see you next week. Awesome.